Welcome. This is Panic Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. In this video, we're going to look at the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric, and we're going to go back to the basics. What is it? Why do we use it? How does it work? All those sorts of things. So let's get started. First thing is, if you want to find out who we are, click on the QRL code or open up the QRL code. It'll tell you who we are, what we do, and why we do it, and reach out if you want us to help you with anything. All right, so again, today's topics, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what is the parcel fabric, how does it work, what's needed in order to go and take your data and put it into the parcel fabric, and what advantages does it have for you over your existing data right now. So first thing we want to do is look at the structure of the parcel fabric, and then fundamentally how it works. So I've got a couple slides here. From a data management standpoint, from a data modeling standpoint, the parcel fabric really consists of a controller object, one which contains code that helps the fabric do certain things. And then there are certain relationships that are built into this. Let's go and explore, a catalog, and this is a parcel fabric here. And the parcel fabric is, in fact, this structure that the structure has a series of parcel types. Parcel type is a layer normally in your data. So, for example, over here in this example, we have tax parcels, and then we have what's commonly called conveyance division parcels. These are divisions or partitions within a subdivision, any sort of private subdivision. We also have a parcel type called simultaneous conveyances. These are subdivisions, certified survey maps. These are sort of private divisions of land. And then we also have another parcel type called PLSS sections. These are within the federalized lands, and these are the rectangular survey system information. But one of the advantages is the parcel fabric, you design your own structure. If you only want to have tax parcels, you can have that. If you want to not have tax parcels, you don't need to have them in there. You define what layers are included inside of your parcel fabric. And it's, I keep saying it layers, but it's actually a parcel type. And let's look at this. If I go to this object, this really contains no data. What it does is it contains information about what this parcel fabric is actually going to go and watch and control over and such. And I do that by looking here, and it says, what are the parcel types that are being controlled by this controller object? And they are, in this case, I have tax parcels, conveyance divisions, simultaneous conveyances, and PLSS sections. It's going to go and watch. And when I have certain things active, it's going to make sure that it complies with the rules that we have built and included inside our parcel fabric. So at the one level, a parcel fabric helps you to make sure that everything is consistent within your data as it relates to parcels. All right, that's what it does. That's the main reason for being there. And if we go back here to this slide, we can see here is the parcel fabric. Again, the parcel fabric has a whole series of data underneath it, and it has rules. These rules help it to make sure that it complies with what you design. This is what my parcel data should be. All right, so let's look a little bit further at this. This parcel fabric actually has a version. The parcel fabric has been out now for several years, and it's gone through several revisions. And the one thing to be aware of is that with each revision, it slightly changes what software you can use with it, what enterprise system you can use if you're serving it out on a server. So you want to be aware of that and careful with it, because, for example, this version that I have here, it will tell me that this is version 5, which is the latest one at the moment. It will tell me that the compatible ArcGIS Pro releases are 2.9, 3.0, 3.1. You can use it with any of those releases. And then the compatible enterprise releases are 10.9.1, 11.0, and 11.1. It is important that you keep them synchronized because the code is stored and the desktop version will call certain routines, certain functions, and you want to make sure that they are stored either in the actual data and available for that data or in the enterprise server. You want to make sure you keep those in sync. All right, so let's look again at what this slide says. The slide says that the Parcel Fabric has topology rules associated with it. It also has error features and attribute rules. Well, let's go back here and let's look at the topology rules that are in this Parcel Fabric. And where are we here? All right, here we are. So in here, it will tell me what feature classes are part of my topology and what rules I have as part of this topology. And what we'll see is that those parcel types actually have two different feature classes associated with them. So the parcel type we had for tax parcels actually has a feature class for lines, in which it goes and stores all the information for the lines that are part of either the surveys or the legal descriptions or the deeds or the subdivision plats or whatever. So we can go and store and memorialize those and use it for analysis, but it also has polygons on here. And it has these rules. These rules go and tell it, for example, that my tax line, the line that's associated with my tax parcel, has to have a point on the end of each line. So the Parcel Fabric will make sure that that point is always there. It has that, in fact, that the lines that are associated with tax parcels cannot have dangles. So they can't have any dangles that are not connected to something else, that they can't self-overlap. So you can't have the same line coming back up on itself, that they can't self-intersect. They have to have breaks in them. And then finally, that the lines themselves have to be on the boundaries of a polygon associated with that parcel type. Those are the line topology rules, and those are the 5 that are in there. And there's one topology rule associated with polygons, and it says basically that the polygon boundary has to have lines on it. All right, so these are the topology rules that come standard with this. This doesn't mean that in your Parcel Fabric, you can't create your own topology rules, but these are the standard rules that are with it. But I do want to go and say, think long and hard before you start adding topology rules in here, only because you may not need them, and they may be a little bit onerous for you. All right, so real quickly, we've got topology rules in here. We also are going to have attribute rules. If we look at attribute rules, let's see if any of these actually have any attribute rules associated with them. An attribute rule is sort of like a topology rule in that it deals not with geometry, which is what topology deals with, but it deals with attribution. And in this case, we've got an attribute rule that says it's going to calculate the acreage, and the code, it's going to go and populate the calculated area field, and it's going to actually put in there, this is an arcade's expression, by the way, it's going to put in the area of that feature, of that polygon, in acres. And every time that we create a parcel, and every time we update it, it's going to update the acreage for those in that calculated area field. And you're going to find that helps you to make sure that your attribution is complete and consistent. And that's another advantage of the Parcel Fabric. It's going to help you ensure that your data is complete and consistent as you go through. That's what the rules are for. And the Parcel Fabric's main job is to make sure that those rules are followed. Part of the design and part of moving into a Parcel Fabric is the development of these rules. Because again, you get to decide what are the rules, how do you want to make it so that your users and your mappers consistently make sure they take advantage of these things. All right, let's look at the actual structure of the Parcel Fabric. These are the things that are associated with it. There is a feature class here called a records feature class. And everything inside the Parcel Fabric is associated with a record. The connection lines, the points, the lines, the polygons from those individual parcel types, those are all associated with records. A record is a way to go and build lineage. It's a way to go and organize elements so that you can go and say, when did I go and map this parcel? What was the document that caused it to be mapped? What changes occurred as a result of that mapping? What did I create? What did I delete? When was it done? That's all stored in the record, and it all relates back to that record. The record can be anything from a reference to a document, a deed of transaction, or a deed of conveyance, an easement deed, a subdivision deed, just a special warranty deed or a warranty deed, a deed of conveyance, or it could be a subdivision. What was changed when you built this subdivision? What was created? What was deleted? That's what the record is for. The record is to organize everything together, and all features inside of a Parcel Fabric must be related to a record. So you can't have lines out there inside your Parcel Fabric that are not related to a record. You can't have polygons that are not related. So a record is a main organizing feature of the Parcel Fabric, and you're going to want to make sure that you think through, how do you create a record, and what do you do with it? All right, and we're going to go through each of these. So let's look and see. On my table of contents, I have here a feature class called Pro Cadastre Records. This is a polygon feature class, as you can see from the icon here, and it's actually stored over in my table of contents here. And if I open this up to look at it, this is the main organizing feature of my Parcel Fabric, and it will list, for example, what's the name of this Parcel Fabric, what's the record type, and again, this was an early demonstration here. It wasn't populated, but we can populate it. If we look at here, we can tell what type of a parcel this is. Is it a combination, a meets and bounds description, an aliquot split, a subdivision, a condo, minor subdivision, a replat, others? Again, because of the flexibility of the Parcel Fabric, you decide what types of records you want to go and track. The next thing is, when was it recorded? Again, you decide, do you want to include this field or not? When was it actually documented? And then it's, okay, how many parcels of the different parcel types are related and associated with this one record? How many of them have been retired? And we'll talk about retired here soon. What's the perimeter of it? And what's the acreage of that? These are all things that you design as part of the records. We'll dig deeper in this as we go through this next hour coming up here. So the records, again, the organizing component on here. The points, those appear at the ends of the lines. The connection lines, these are the lines that help to define where something is, or help to reinforce the geometry of your parcel. They don't necessarily define the boundary of the parcel, but they define sort of the location of the parcel, or they help impact the geometry. So how would you use those? If you have a meets and bounds description that says commence at this point, then go a bearing and distance to another point, then a bearing and distance to another point, to the point of beginning, those first two courses, because they don't define the boundary, they just define where the boundary is, they would be connection lines. They are not part of the parcel, but they help define where it is. Another way to use connection lines is for meander lines. If you've got a parcel which is next to some water, a meander line helps to define and enforce the geometry, because the riparian areas, the water areas, often will change and you rarely find them well defined. So in this case, you can define the meander line with a connection line and build it from there. So records, points, lines, and then we have each parcel type has its own set of lines and polygons on here. So what does that mean? So that means, for example, let's look down here at tax parcels. I have a tax parcel polygon and I have a tax line feature class. Those are both standard types of feature classes in here. It's another advantage of the Parcel Fabric, is that while there's relationships between all of this, these are really standard feature classes that you're using. All right, so there's nothing special about this tax polygon. It has a couple of unique fields in there, but there's nothing really special about it. It's still tax polygons. These are tax lines on here. All right, but when you bring it in here, because the Parcel Fabric tracks not just current parcels, but it also tracks historic parcels and historic tax lines. Remember, I said that what the Parcel Fabric does is it tracks what was created and what was deleted. Inside the Parcel Fabric, you can start building history. You can build a lineage for what did this transaction do to my data. You can begin to start analyzing, where did this parcel come from? What did it look like before I made this transaction? And that's by going and storing inside these feature classes, whether or not it's a current line or whether it's a historic line. How are those defined? If we go to properties of the line feature class, we can see that each of them have a definition query about it. The current tax lines say the information, there's no information stored in the retired by record on here. So the retired by record is null. However, in the historic, the retired by record actually, sorry, wrong place. Make sure I switch. The retired by record is not null. So something has been stored in that field that says this is historic. All right. So let's go back here again and look at this a little bit more. By the way, if you're here as part of the workshop and you're watching it live and you have a question or comment, please put it over in the chat window, and Chris will go and he'll be moderating it, and he'll make sure that I pay attention and make sure that I answer your questions or comments on here. All right. We talked about rules already. We talked about those topology rules. Let's talk about deployment of a Parcel Fabric, because right now there's two different ways to deploy a Parcel Fabric. If you work in an organization and it only has one mapper, one person that maps at any one time, you can deploy this in a file geodatabase. And this is the easiest way to go and deploy it. You You go and you create the parcel fabric in the file geo database. You go and add it, and you manage it in the parcel fabric. Everything is maintained in a file geo database. All right. This cannot be stored on a file server. It has to be a file geodatabase structure, but it can work in a file geodatabase. Now, when I said it can't be stored on a file server, it actually can be stored on a server, but not one that has STE, nor one that has an enterprise server in place for serving portal or anything. This is the simplest way to go and do it. And this is where only one person at a time is editing it. All right. Chris, I see we have something over in the chat window. How does the requirement for every feature to have a record work at the time of migration into the parcel fabric, since our current data does not include this data? It's a good question. I'm going to show you sort of the simple steps how to do it. I won't show you everything, but I'll show you enough that you can go and understand what you have to do. All right. The other option that we have right now is that you can do it inside of an enterprise. And this is how you do multi-user editing on here. And it requires branch versioning on the enterprise or portal. It also requires a special user type to be assigned to that. But basically how it works is that you've got a multi-editor geodatabase with a map document that's published to the server. And then these multiple clients, multiple users then go and connect to that service and edit all the changes in a branch version. If you have more than one person you want to edit at the time, this is what you must do. And right now, this is the only way to do that. We also have another question. Can the FGD be stored on a network shared drive, or is it better on a local machine? Good question. And there's nuances there. It can be shared on a shared drive. However, as with all file geodatabases, there's a lot of input and output going on there. So it's dependent upon your network and how much latency is built into it. Do you have switches? Do you have routers? How fast is that network? What type of storage do you have on that network server? So the question is it going to be better to be stored local or better to be stored on a server? As always, it depends. You want to have, if you're going to store it on a server, make it really fast. Make sure you have a fast network. Make sure that in fact it has good I/O, very low latency on there, and you've got good storage, hopefully solid state drives instead of spinning drives, and hopefully it responds well. I'm sorry I can't give you a definite answer, but that's sort of it. I can tell you that here at Panda, we actually store our file geodatabases in a cloud storage. And some of us work directly on that cloud storage. Others actually download and use it locally. It's dependent upon how big the data is, how often you're working with it, how much work you're doing on it, as far as how you finally go and deploy it on there. But a file geodatabase is still the simpler solution if you only have one person editing. Otherwise, by all means, it's getting now where 75% of our clients that we put into the Parcel Fabric are using Enterprise and Portal now. All right. We talked a little bit about version compatibility. Right now, we are on version 5 of the Parcel Fabric. And the only time I actually suggest to one of my clients that they go back to version 3 is when their IT department refuses to go and upgrade beyond 10.8.1. The reality is, sooner or later, you're going to be upgrading into the newer versions, and I would strongly recommend you go to 10.9.1, 11, or 11.1 for the best performance. The other reason is that If you're back at 10.8.1, you're restricted in only using ArcGIS Pro 2.6.x, which means you don't have all the functionality. You really want to get all the functionality because Esri continues to do a great job of improving it over and over and over. Every new release has new improvements in it because they are listening to us. Determining the Parcel Fabric version. Again, if you right-click on this blue object, again, the Parcel Fabric, and go to Properties, you can tell it what the Parcel Fabric is and what version it actually is on there. Parcel Fabric feature classes. Beyond the actual parcel types, there are some standard feature classes that are built into the Parcel Fabric. There is the controller object. There are these connection lines, the points feature class, the records feature class, a standard topology, and relationship classes. And you can see it here that my Parcel Fabric, because I have 4 different parcel types here. I have tax parcels, conveyance divisions, simultaneous conveyances, and I have PLSS. I have in here, I have conveyance division lines, I have PLSS section lines and polygons, I have simultaneous conveyance, and I have tax lines and polygons. And then for each of these, I have a relationship class that relates my tax parcel polygons and my tax parcel lines to the records. So you'll see a series of these relationship classes. That's what you see here. You have a series of relationship classes that are built as part of it. So as you're building this, you go and you create the Parcel Fabric, then you add the parcel types in there, and you go and build it that way, and upgrading it once you have an older one. This is an important slide. Loading a Parcel Fabric into the table of contents. One of the things I'll often find is that I'll have a client come and call me and they say, Frank, there's something wrong with the Parcel Fabric. We loaded it up and it doesn't work. Well, it turns out that, again, this is the Parcel Fabric. What they'll often do is they'll take the feature data set, because this was common practice in ArcMap, and say, let's add this to a new map document. And it goes and takes everything in there and adds it in. The problem being, when it does that, it doesn't understand that there's actually a Parcel Fabric that's being loaded. So, for example, you wind up with this. You'll have conveyance division lines in here separately. You'll have simultaneous conveyance lines in here separately, and it'll list them the way ArcMap used to do it. And that's a no-no. That's not what you're supposed to do, because in order for your table of contents to understand you have a Parcel Fabric, all right, the proper way of doing this is going to the Parcel Fabric, right-clicking and saying, add this to a new map, in which case it will pull the Parcel Fabric in and say, oh, this is a Parcel Fabric. So let me go and install these and load them correctly and group my layers together correctly, so that it recognizes here's where the records are, here's my topology, my points, my connection lines, and group those parcel types together. So I have in this case, I have tax parcels, I have a tax group with my current tax lines, current tax polygons, and historic tax lines and historic tax polygons. It will, if you've loaded this correctly, it will load it up, read the Parcel Fabric object and say, okay, I need to group these together according to what they represent. That's the correct way to bring a Parcel Fabric into a table of contents for you to work with it. All right. If you don't see historic, you haven't loaded it correctly. If you don't see groups, like what I did here, where I just loaded it you don't see groups, you have not loaded it correctly. So just go into, delete that map document. By the way, let me see if I can go and open that up again. Let's go back here to my maps, and that was map number 1, I believe. Let's open that and see. If that's, no, it wasn't. It was map number 2. Get rid of map number 1. Map number 2. When I did this, note right up here, there was no indicator that this got a Parcel Fabric loaded. So again, if you don't see this thing here, this is called, by the way, this is called a heads-up display. That heads-up display tells the Parcel Fabric to go and begin listening, begin watching for what's going on. If you haven't done that, if you don't have a heads-up display on there, it hasn't been loaded correctly. In this case, I loaded it correctly, and I do have a heads-up display. All right, let's go back here now. Let's see what else slides I have before I get in here. Again, it will create your group layers, sets the definition queries, standard symbology on here, and you can begin modifying it there. All right, let's talk about the Parcel Fabric. Let's actually start demonstrating what is the Parcel Fabric, what does it do? All right, so I'm going to go to an empty space here, and I'm going to start using sort of a demo transaction. So I'm going to create a record, and this is the demo record. All right, and this is just it's just going to be let's just call it a meets and bounds split. And I can tell what the date is if I want. I don't have to, but I can tell it to create. When I've created a record and I've told it to create it, automatically it puts it over in my heads-up display. The heads-up display is a way to go and be notified visually, I've got something active, so it's going to track everything I do. And so now when I begin to create a line, a parcel line, for example, I'm going to create a tax line here. I'm going to use this, and I'm going to go and just use standard type of constraints here. I'm going to do 45 degrees northeast. All right, I'm going to do 250 feet, and I'm going to hit enter. All right, and there's my new line. If I look at my attributes, one of the things that it has done is, because I have an active record, it has actually said, here is a line that was created while you have an active record. So it was created by, and this is the global ID of this record polygon that's being generated right now. So this is the global ID of my record. And each line that I create as part of this is actually going to get coded with this same global ID. However I create them, it's going to get coded by them. So if I go and select all of these lines and I look at them, I can see that every one of them shares the same relationship. It says these were all created in relative to this record. All right, this is the way the Parcel Fabric works. So now that I have lines, my Parcel Fabric will now allow me to go and start evaluating these lines. For example, I can say, tell me whether or not these lines form a closed polygon or not. And that command, it's actually called create seeds. And when I click on that, it will go and evaluate all of the lines associated with this record and create a seed. Well, what is a seed? If I go in here and select this thing and I look at the attributes, it's actually a polygon. But that polygon actually is only 20 feet perimeter, and it's got a square area, a shape area of 33 square feet. It is a tiny polygon, but it's the beginning. It's the beginning of my parcel. And so the create seeds function allows us to go and analyze our data and determine, do we have a closed polygon? Note here that the seed is also marked as being, it's a seed. And it's going to use that with the next step, which is go and build my seeds so that they match the lines that are used to define them. So I'm going to say, build my seed into my parcel. Now, we weren't really zoomed in on here, but if we were to go and look, we would have seen not only did it build the seed out, but it also evaluated the lines that were part of this record and said, your lines don't have points on the ends of them. Let me go and create points on there. And if I undo this, go back here, there's no point here. And when I tell it to go ahead and build, it will build a point there. To the point where if I go in here and as part of my heads up display say, show me everything that's related to this record. Again, a record is an organizing feature that goes and allows you to tell it what's been created, what's been deleted on here. It says that you built 4 points, 4 lines, and 1 tax polygon on there. And it has all that information about those. All right. And it also goes and says that Frank did it on this date, and I modified it on this date here. So one of the advantages of the Parcel Fabric is not only is it a mapping system, but it's organization that allows you to begin tracking what was created, tracking what was deleted, tracking how things changed, and begin analyzing the quality of that data. And we'll start talking about what type of analysis tools we have in there. All right, we've covered the overall structure. It's a controller object, and that controller object then goes and has parcel types in here. Those parcel types each have a line and a polygon feature class. They have certain attribution on there. There's topology rules, there's attribute rules. We talked about loading a parcel fabric in. We talked about the historic parcels. We talked a little bit about lineage. You're going to find in future releases that Esri starts allowing us to go and visually see this parcel. Where did it come from? So we'll be able to go with whatever history we're creating, go backwards and say, okay, before it was split out, it was part of this parcel, and then that one was part of this parcel here. So it'll allow us to go all the way down. All right, so let's go now and let's close out our heads up display. And let's go down here and look at some of the other things that are in here. Some of the elements that we have is that when we go and create lines inside the parcel fabric, these lines, and I'm going to go and open up my data design for my tax lines to go and demonstrate. These tax lines have true COGO values associated with them, so that we have a direction field, we have a distance field, a radius field, an arc length field, and a radius 2 field. It's a radius 2 field that's kind of unique to some of us. A radius 2 field has to do with a spiral curve. So not only can you do true regular parametric curves, but you can also do spiral curves in here. All right, so these are the COGO fields in here. But interestingly, these COGO fields are no longer string values. These COGO fields are now actually numeric values, double word numbers. that we can configure. But here's the interesting part on here. There is, as part of the Parcel Fabric, this is not standard ArcGIS Pro, part of the Parcel Fabric, there is a field called COGOTYPE. That COGOTYPE field actually has a domain stored on it, and that domain says one of three things. Was the COGO value that's stored on this line entered by the mapper, in which case it gets coded as entered? Was it from geometry, which means I use the update COGO command to have it inverse and calculate what the bearing and distance was, or what the curve information was? Or, and this one's unique, or was it computed by the software as a result of a change? So the first time we create a line, if we enter in the COGO values, it says this was entered. If we then, for example, do a split or a divide or a clip or anything that changes the values in that COGO, it then becomes computed, meaning that it wasn't entered by the mapper, but it has been computed by the software. Interesting thing about this is that the computing that gets done is not just an addition and subtraction, but it's the proration that gets in there. So if we have a line where, let's show you, all right, if I go and create a line, let's go back here, let's create a line, let's go back up here. Let's create a line here, and let's make sure that we have an active record, all right, and let's create a line here. All right, that line now has no COGO values on here. But if we create a line that has COGO values on here, for example, let's do direction and distance again. Let's do 60 degrees northeast for 200 feet, enter. All right, that line, which now becomes current, actually says that it has the bearing and the distance stored on it, and that line was entered by the editor, by the user. And it goes and tells me not only that, but it also will go and tell me down here what the actual shape length is in here. Let's go and see this one here. This is the one that I had created before. And if we note, it wasn't marked. There was no COGO type on here. There's a tool called Update COGO here, that if I go and update that COGO, here it is here, update the COGO on my selected line. All right, it goes and calculates it, but more importantly, what does it do with my COGO type? It automatically says that, oh, this is from geometry. The software calculated this by inversing that line and figuring out how big that value is. So that's from geometry. Well, right now that line is 405 feet long. I'm going to change it. I'm going to tell you that what I did is I just went and changed that so that that's now 400 feet long. And I'm doing that because I'm going to divide that and show you what happens when I divide it. Remember, that line was 405.6 feet long. If I go in here and divide this, let's go back to modify, then we go to divide here, dividing my line, and I tell it divide it into two parts, two equal parts, all right? Notice it's reading my COGO values now, not the overall length of the line, because it had a COGO value and said, if you divide this into two parts, they're both going to be 200. So now let's go and divide it, get off the divide tool. Now I can see that each of these lines is 200 foot long. and it's been computed values, meaning the software calculated what those values should be. If I took a line, which my COGO said was 400, and divided it in half, each of those should be 200 feet, even though the shape length is actually 202.8 feet. So it's going to start keeping track of the COGO values here. Where did those COGO values come from? Did you enter them? Did you inverse them? Or did you get it from geometry? Or was there something else that's happened since they were originally created? Again, it's part of this analysis. Part of the functionality of the Parcel Fabric is to allow you to begin analyzing what's happening on here. All right. So let's look at what other things we want to talk about before we get into that. By the way, while we're at this, let's go ahead and show you something else. If I go and tell it to label this, label these lines, look at what this does. This says that this line here, this COGO line that I created, actually was 200 feet long. I created it with COGO, but notice it's saying that those values, those are good values. You can rely upon them because the editor actually went and input those COGO values on here. But these COGO values here said those are COGO values, but they actually were computed. So these are kind of plus or minus on here. Well, let's go and change these one more time. Let's go to one of these and change it from computed to null, or do it from geometry. All right. From geometry, notice the labels automatically go and put brackets around it, meaning this is just sort of, it was digitized in, and this is the digitized value on here. I wouldn't rely upon this anymore. So the Parcel Fabric provides not just standard updating COGO values in here, but also provides label expressions and labeling routines to help you to begin analyzing your data, your COGO data. Where did it come from? How was it built? What happened to it before? What happened to it after? All right. This is one of the big advantages of the Parcel Fabric, to allow you to go and use this to help you to begin analyzing what's been done with your software or with your parcel data. How is it built? How accurate is it? How much can you rely upon it? Again, Parcel Fabric gives you major advantages beyond just cartography. I often go and say that the advantage of the Parcel Fabric is it changes the mindset of the mappers. They no longer are cartographers. They no longer are building a map. Instead, they're building a land records digital library. This is information about the transactions that occurred, not just what the result is, but here's the information about it. Here's when it was done. Here's who did it. Here's the type of transaction it was, a reference over to the document. And here's how I built it. Here's what I created. Here's what I deleted. So there's all sorts of information, all sorts of land record information being built as part of that, to the point where I think after a while, you stop thinking of yourself as cartographers and start thinking about yourself as curators of digital data. You are building a library of land record information on here. All right, I want to show you one more thing with the Parcel Fabric before we finish out this workshop. For those of you who had questions, please stick around afterwards, because I'm going to show you a whole bunch of other things, but not inside the recording. All right, so here's another thing that the Parcel Fabric will allow me to do. Let's go to a bookmark I have here. Where is that new one? Here. All right. So let's go ahead and here's our labels. And we can see from these labels that, in fact, there's a lot of information on here. And one of the things that we see, for example, is that there's actually a line that represents the polygon here, a line that represents a polygon here. So we see duplication of lines. We see all sorts of issues. Well, what the Parcel Fabric will allow us to do, again, this is Parcel Fabric specific, is we can select these parcels. All right, and let's unselect this. We don't care about that. And there's a tool in the Parcel Fabric called Reconstruct the Boundaries. And it will take and analyze the lines that are associated with the records that built these parcels. And it will analyze those lines and it will say, okay, if I have multiple lines that fit together and form one boundary, if they have the same bearing within a tolerance, and if they have COGO values on here, why not replace the two split lines with one standard line? And that's what this will do. And by the way, not only will we do that, but it will say, don't have duplication of my labels. It will analyze and say, if it has the same label on both sides, put it on the line instead of putting it above or below the line. If it has different ones, put it so the label is inside the parcel. So that's what this Reconstruct Boundaries is going to do. It's going to analyze those polygons in here. Let me make sure I have all of them in here and just make sure I analyze those polygons and say, make sure you analyze them and you tell me what these values are. I actually have an extra 182 here. That's an old line. But what it did is it added up these values to 349 from here to here, has the 46 here, has this 394 from here to here, says this label is shared, this label is shared, this label is shared, and automatically goes and puts this information on the correct side of this. So, for example, I could take these parcels and say, let's go ahead and reconstruct these to make my labeling more accurate and to make it so that it better understands what's going on here. And do that. It's gone and done that. Let's see if there's another area here. This data set I use so often, I've fixed almost all of them. I think this has already been fixed. Yeah, I think the rest of this has been fixed enough. I can go and have it go and analyze these and see what's going on here. Okay. All right, so what we've done today is we've covered Parcel Fabric, what it is, what it does, the structure of it. It's a controller data set that has associated parcel types. We've talked about the topology rules. We talked about the attribution rules. We talked about how to load a Parcel Fabric, how it goes and groups the layers together, how it goes and gives you both current and historic on here. Talked about what is a seed, how to create a seed. Talked about how it associates lines that are created, lines that are deleted. Let's go and do one more. It goes and allows us to go and take these two parcels. I have an active record and I can merge them together. When I merge them together, I'll tell it what parcel I actually want it to go and merge into. And it will automatically go and do that. And then it will go and show me the historic parcels on there. All right. So there's the types of processes you can do. Again, the Parcel Fabric is to make sure that your data maintains consistency, has everything that's necessary in there.
Frank.
Yes.
Mark has a question in the chat. Does Reconstruct parcels work for any selected parcel or only selected parcels within the active record?
It works for any selected parcels. Yeah, works for anything. You don't actually have to have an active record in there. It will automatically go and track that. It is a Parcel Fabric specific component on here, and it allows you to go and handle multiple parcels at the same time without having to be concerned with whether or not there's an active record or not. All right. Thank you. Good question. And I'm going to stop the recording now and stick around. We got more to show you. All right. Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.